Hello, and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today, we are going to talk about integrity, or that's what we think we're going to talk about. Not just integrity, but finding our integrity in connection to total authentic self versus the compartmentalized ego-driven self. As we have our conversations ahead of this and decide what we're going to talk about, that's what we came up with. And it came up for me. I often wake up in the morning on Friday and a word comes into my head that's what I want to talk about. Because I'm in a goals group where I have quarterly goals that I look at, and I am coming to the end of this season of goals, and I have completed almost none of them. And when I mentioned this, Kathleen said, "Oh yeah, there's one goal I haven't completed, and I think I can complete that in the end." And I almost started crying. And I realized, what can I do? And I think I may not be the only person in this boat. And what can we do to get into integrity? And what I mean by integrity doesn't mean that I'm doing everything I said that I was going to do, because clearly I say I'm going to do stuff that I'm not going to do. But how can I be at truth with myself? And then Kathleen has a lot more to say about it in terms of this. Okay, let me just say, what I came to at the end was that I looked at all the goals I haven't completed, and I realized these are not strategic issues. I know how to do every one of these. I have come to the end of the point that I can do without going into a deeper level of vulnerability on every level. And then this has to do with, automating my business. Why that requires vulnerability, it does, because then I can't control everything. But automating my business, dating, and sharing, publishing work of mine that is really important to me, that I'm sitting on, that I'm hiding. I'm not trying to hide it, I'm just not sharing it. So those three areas of my life, and if I look at all those and I'm like, well, I'm not moving on all those, that's not a strategic issue. And it's not like I'm sitting around, watching television all day, or even Netflix, or even YouTube videos. I'm working, but I've hit my limit of what I'm willing to share, of my comfort level. I'm willing. I just don't know. I'm not moving forward. So I want to get into integrity. And one of the things I realized is that if I want my words to be in integrity with my actions, I'm going to need to be honest about that.
Yes, and I think, my mind goes to what you're really talking about as integrity is really living the energies that are inside of you that want to be expressed. Because all of those things you just said that are goals are tied to some energy inside of you that wants to be expressed, particularly the work you want to publish. The business automation sounds a little bit, maybe like a little bit different kind of issue. But anyway, I think that part of what Jung has to say that is helpful, and this, of course, is my spin on Jung, informed by all of my other orientations also, is that our psyche is a multiplicity of opposites, meaning that within our psyche soul, within our body mind, and I use those terms interchangeably at this moment, there are all kinds of energy systems that are not necessarily in agreement with one another. This energy system that is the instinctive animal nature for me wants to stay in bed longer right now and go to bed earlier because we're almost at the winter solstice. And this other energy in me loves the early morning hours for meditation and creativity. And it wants me up at 4:30 or 5:30 doing that. But this animal nature that, but it's winter and it's cold and we pull in and hibernate, wants that. And so here I am I out of integrity if I do one and not the other? The truth of the matter is they both are real energy centers within me, and not just within me, within all of us. Some equivalent. Maybe the equivalent for you isn't wanting to get up early for meditation and creativity. And so I think if we're going to talk about integrity, we have to start with the recognition that the reality of who we are as a psyche, the reality of who we are as a person, is we're a complex of opposites. And so the question of integrity then becomes problematic if integrity means one-sidedness. So for instance, if my goal is I'm getting up 7 days a week, 365 days a year for meditation at 5 or 5:30, and if I don't do that, I'm out of integrity, then I'm doing injury to that animal nature in me that wants to align with the cycles and do what our animal friends and sentient beings are doing this time of year, which is pulling in and hibernating, being less active. So I think we have to begin by realizing to be in integrity, we have to wrestle with these opposites. And we have to find a way for each to have their due. We have to find a way for each to have space. And so I wonder about that being at work behind you're not meeting your goals.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I was just like opposite, but before I go down that little rabbit hole, I do believe that for me, there is I wouldn't call it a compulsion to hide, to not to not show, to be afraid that if I show something, it's going to be criticized, and it's not that I mind the criticism, it's what happens after the criticism. Then I have to go back to my room and I have to fix it, and I think this is why I so love live improv performance, is that there's no fixing. So the entire time that I'm improvising, I am free of any anxiety of what happens afterwards. What happens afterwards is it's done. You did it, it's over. It was that moment. I played that moment. I brought whatever that moment is in the world. I just crystallized it into sound. But when I am making, when I'm publishing something, and the first thing I hear is like, oh, there's a mistake here. I'm just like, get over it. There's going to be mistakes, whatever. And I don't know. And maybe it just makes, I'm not sure. I mean, like, obviously, like, I can't even talk about this. And it's so funny because I know so many people are like, wow, but you can get up on stage and you're like fearless on stage. And it's because there's no fixing. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like you got to go back to your room. You got to get it right. It's not working for someone. Someone didn't understand it. And that's me putting it all on somebody else, because really I'm just scared. I just haven't developed that level. And I know the strategies. I mean, there's a strategy, which is you publish a piece of music, and along with it, you publish a blog post where you say there's going to be mistakes, and here's where the mistakes, I'm going to describe the fixes for the mistakes. So I'm just realizing as I'm saying this, that when you publish something, there is an implied truth that this is the definitive, it is complete, it is done. And I just realized that's out of integrity. That is not true.
That's right. It is not true, because truth is ever evolving. And I think artists and writers will tell you, 10 books down the road, they look back at their first book and they may shudder because of what they've written, that then they write about in a different way. I mean, if we are growing, if we are living into the integrity of our wholeness, then what we write today is different than what we'll write 6 months from now or a year. I always say sometimes when I present to people who tend to want to make me the authority and have the answer, I'll say, this is my working understanding of this today. And if you hear me in 6 months, hopefully it'll be a little bit different, because that means I will have continued to grow.
Right.
So I think part of it sounds like what's blocking you, and I think what does block a lot of people, is this notion that it's got to be right, which means it's got to be perfect, which means that whoever's looking at it gets to determine what perfect and right is. And otherwise, we've done something wrong and shame on us, and we should slink back off into our little cave until we can fix ourselves. And that is such a deadly paradigm. And it is such a distorted way of thinking and experiencing that has been rampant in our culture, in our civilization for lots.
Well, let me ask you something. Who benefits from that? Is it advertising? I mean, I'm so serious.
Yeah.
Why is that there? Who benefits from it? Who is
Well,
it?
yeah, I think that's a that's a big question. What I would say is definitely advertising benefits from it, but I think we're talking about something that's centuries old. That as institutions came into being, and things got split into right and wrong and good and bad, it was also a way of institutions having control over people. And so I think that some of these ideas that are helpful at times for like social control, like we want social mores, we want there to be certain kind of expectations, but they've gone too far to where they've squelched the expression of the unique gifts and perspectives of the individual person.
Right.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I would like to say, or we squelch ourselves, which is my experience. We squelch ourselves with it. So let me bring us back to this idea of integrity and integrity towards the end of the year. Because as we were talking in the beginning, my thought was, and I must read my important notes here, what would, well, apparently, writing more clearly, but that's actually true, what I just said. Apparently, writing more clearly, meaning owning,
Mm-hmm.
owning where I am and owning the value. Because I must say that the one thing that I've learned, okay, so with what you just said, that when you publish something, it's gonna be wrong, but you can't get to the next book and the next book and the next book and the next book without going through
Right.
actually completing.
Right.
And so so many things are in my head. I'm thinking about my students who just did their final beginning projects and why they're called that, and also me. What I learned this year by finally writing down what my goals were and looking at them and realizing how repeatedly out of integrity I am with them is that I have been able to look at them and say, what is it about? Where have I come?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember if I said this before we started or not, but in every one of my goals, which this quarter were automation, dating, and publishing, I have come to the same impasse, which is I cannot move forward at the level of spiritual muscle I have in my willingness to be vulnerable. I cannot, I've come to, that's the wall. No strategy is going to take me, people can say, well, why don't you do this? And it's not going to matter.
Well, it doesn't matter because somewhere you still don't feel safe. And until that place is encountered now and met with compassion and the bit of self-confidence is brought into the present, you won't move forward because it's not an ego block. It is a block of some energy in you that's actually protecting you. And at some point in time in your life, or whoever's listening, those energies did protect. But then there comes a point in adulthood, and it usually is around forward movement with a creative project, or forward movement and just adapting to life so we can continue to thrive. We get stuck. And then we have to go back to where is the stuckness rooted? Because it's not in your case, now maybe in some people's case, it's merely a matter of their ego learning how to have good strategy and how to mobilize. But we know that's not your case. And I think not the case probably for most of our listeners. And so we have to look at, okay, where is this impasse rooted? What's going on deeper and levels of my being that I'm not even aware of? And beginning to open up to that information as it comes up in memories or dreams or you know,
Can you
flashes.
Can you talk more about you? There's two things that you said earlier that I feel like are here, and one was energies, that energies get stuck. And then before we got on you were talking about the two, and maybe, well, you talked about the animal and the opposite, but you were talking about the persona,
Mhm.
the integrity of our persona or how we think we're being perceived, and then the integrity of our authentic self,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I would love to hear more about those two things, those opposites, and I'm always okay. All right, those things that seem opposite in this situation.
Sure. Yeah. So our persona is the mask we put on that we show the world. And in terms of being a psychic structure, our persona mediates between our ego, our sense of who we are, and the collective consciousness. And you share a beautiful story, if I'm going to reference, um, where you wanted to begin singing. You were just playing the harp, and you wanted to become a singer. And word got back to you either from your manager or somebody that someone had said if you didn't quit singing, you were going to ruin your career. And you said, "That's what I do. I sing. That's part of who I am." In that moment, whomever gave that feedback had a persona, wanted you to maintain a certain persona of what you, DHC, as a harpist were. And they wanted you to stay in that box, in that image, and that role. And you, in that moment, with your own desire to live more authentically, the whole of you, you said, "Nope, I'm singing. I don't care." And it hasn't ruined your career. So that's an example of where instead of getting caught in the limitations of a persona, you took the risk. You were vulnerable and moved into expressing another whole energy in you. So we all constantly, no matter how old we are, I mean, hopefully this will go on until we're 90 or 100 if we live that long, we're going to have opportunities to really step outside of the box we put ourselves in, the box the collective has put us in, and really say, "Nope, that's not working for me this anymore, and this is what I'm doing." And that is the difference between getting caught in living the persona and living authentically. Sometimes the reasons we get stuck at an impasse with goals that our ego has identified is they're ego driven, and they really are about the collective conscious expectations we've adopted that now feel like our own. When in truth, if we look inside of ourselves to our own heart, head, gut, and soul, there may be something else that we want. And so sometimes the impasse has nothing to do with lack of discipline or even focus, but it just has to do with the reality that the goal may be still more in alignment with the outer world self, ego, persona, collective images versus the ego in connection to the larger authentic self.
I want to go back to that story that you just brought up because there's an
Mm-hmm.
important point in it to me in that I did not have the courage to say, this is what I do until I saw somebody else do that. And the full story is that I was and can be very snobby, but I definitely was incredibly snobby and elitist earlier in my life. And I had some friends who were harpists, great harpists, and they were also singing. This is actually a story out of Strings of Passion, which is the book that I'm working on, and also the class that begins in January that's all about performance. Well, it's beyond performance. And so I had these friends, they were great harpists. They also sang. And I was like, well, their harping is so good. I mean, but they're singing. And I was really snobby about their singing. And being the snob that I was, and I have to fix everything, went to one of them and said, I don't understand. You're such a great harpist. Why do you sing?
Mm-hmm.
And she just looked at me and she said, because that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain was like, well, I'll never let anybody hear me doing something that's not like great, which could have been a clue to me right then that I was using the harp to hide.
Mhm.
Um, but then when I realized that I was cutting myself off
Mhm.
and that I had to sing and I was getting that I couldn't move forward in my life without singing. I had her phrase in my head. It was like she had gone before me with a machete into the forest, although that's a terrible example. So let's just say whatever. You know, she had gone and made a path before me. And by the way, what this falls in the story is that they kept making albums and singing, and each year their singing got better and better and better and better. But mine did not get any better because I wasn't willing to be out there and let it look like I couldn't do what I wanted to do, or like I wasn't good at it. And that's when I realized there was no way forward but to share myself as the imperfect being, singer, whatever that I was. And thank God she said that to me, because then I knew what to say when people started saying like, look, you're a great harpist, please don't sing.
Right.
It's like, and I think this is why it's so important. I get it. Like, it's so important for us to share the journey and what we're experiencing, and so important for us to share our imperfect selves.
Mhm.
And yet, and why? I mean, because then we're a beacon for somebody, or a beacon for somebody else. And I know there's books, and that's great. And it's when a human in my life is willing to stand in who they are,
Yeah.
that it has the greatest impact on me.
Yes, and I think for all of us, and we need one another. That's one of the reasons we need one another, is because when one person has the courage to individuate, to live and express their unique self, their unique voice, literally and symbolically, then it gives us the courage to do it. You know,
Why? How does that happen?
that we get the courage from each
How
other.
do I get the courage from somebody else? I mean, I see it happen.
Well, I think it's because because I'm chuckling. Jung says this. He says one of the greatest gifts of humans, as well as curses, is our ability to imitate. So that in the process of becoming an individual
Right,
and being authentic, we imitate. And
right, because that gives us a form to fall in. You know,
right.
you're making me realize that there's a class that I have in my academy called Baroque Flamenco, Beyond the Page. But
Mhm.
what I do is just sort of take people step by step through this piece. So it's not, you don't look at the piece like, here's the piece, go play it. But it's like step by step, not note by note, but
Mhm.
compositional level by compositional level. And people have said to me, like, what they love is at the end, they didn't realize they were learning the piece. They were just copying me. Just follow me. And I do think that is such a powerful, oh, I can't always find people to follow, and I don't always know what I'm following. It's not broken down enough for me.
Yeah, and so I mean, imitation has it can be helpful and benefit, and has a positive side, and then sometimes it has a negative side because we imitate things like we go for perfection, which then become an albatross around our neck, and that prevent us from moving. So I mean, I think again, the more mindful we can be of the effect of that. You know, I want to talk about the perfection for a minute and integrity and authenticity. Perfection blocks authenticity because perfection is an ego ideal that does not exist in the natural world. What exists in the natural world are things that are in right order and the wholeness of a mechanism or an organism. So, you know, because a flower or a bird, or because my little dog or your cats learn differently and move through the world differently, we don't consider them broken and in need of fixing. We look at them in the quote perfection, the wholeness of that's their nature. That's how they work. And when we can realize that part of living in integrity to our authenticity is understanding how we work. What is my natural rhythm? So for you with those goals your ego has identified and your collective group, all outer focus, are holding you accountable for, if you can stop and go inside and say, okay, what do I know about my own nature here? I mean, let's face it, Dixie, you, me, probably most of our listeners, we've done a lot in our life and we've accomplished a lot. So we know a lot about how we work. We know a lot about our impasses. We knew, right? And sometimes the problem is we have this outer ideal of how we should be doing it and how we should be moving forward that just may not be in sync with our own rhythm and our own nature at all. So this notion of perfectionism, the perfect way of doing it, the ideal, the right way, is extremely debilitating to being authentic. So if we're going to be in integrity, we have to realize that sometimes how we move towards something is in fits and starts or starts and stops.
All right. Well, so many things. I've just been writing down these things. I just want to say also that it is my goals group who and they're not just like holding me to the fire. They were the ones that helped me see why I was not moving and try to find out what realistic goals for me were versus the ones I made. So all the things I wrote down were self-conscious, like my cat's not self-conscious, I am. So I'm trying to be me within this body that's also judging me. Difficult. And then I wrote, what if I'm not going to change? Like, what if I mean, because you said, we know ourselves. I mean, we've been this. I've been this for 67 years.
Yeah.
So, and it's never occurred to me like, yeah, what if that's how I am? What if I'm not going to change? And resourcefulness is very important to me. And it's something that I teach. And it's something that I teach in the academy. And I deeply believe in it, that we can achieve, we can express at a level of mastery, regardless of our technical abilities and regardless of what resources we have and are, if we're in integrity with them, meaning not if we pull them up to what we think they should be, but if we believe in the integrity of what they are and who we are. Now, I do not believe that. I'm standing here saying it, and I can't accept that there is a truth in the possibility that I could do integrity from the other side. My idea is I can only be in integrity if I do all the things that I say I'm going to do, get them all up in the air. I'm posing this thought, but it's terrifying that I could get into integrity by actually accepting how I do things. I mean, I don't even know how to open my mind to that.
Mm-hmm. I think you're hitting on something really important. And, there's the paradox of when we accept how we really do things, the energy begins to flow freely. But when we try to push ourselves into someone else's or our own ego ideals version of what that's supposed to look like, it blocks the energy.
In my head, I'm saying, but that's not a viable person. That's not a viable artist. That's not a viable...
Oh, so I want to send compassion to that part of you that feels that way, because we know it's not the truth. There's lots of evidence that's not true. I think it may be the truth of an experience you had as a child. And I couldn't help but think about You know, how many times maybe you were sent to your room after you did something and, you know, told to go back and work on it and fix it. Or,
Yeah, that's like the worst thing to me. I mean,
yeah,
go ahead, do whatever you want, but don't send me to my room. And for God's sake, don't send me to my room to clean it up because I don't know how.
yeah, yeah. So maybe that's where there's that the impasse originates, because now there's a part of you that keeps sending you to your room.
I see that.
And
Yeah.
that
And
is
you know, and I realized very early in our conversation, I wrote down how to parent
yeah.
myself both with kindness and discipline. Because
Mhm.
discipline is not a dirty word. A discipline is something that supports through tiny, repetitive, consistent actions. And if I didn't have a discipline of practice, I wouldn't, you know, my hands they'll get they go weak and weird. But
Mhm.
and I've discovered ways to engage in the discipline of my practice that are fun.
Mhm.
Like I watch Netflix while I'm doing it. So and that works for me
Mhm.
because it develops my body. So I guess, and I know we don't have much more time. So just tell me how we can I mean, I guess I'm left with that. This we started with the idea of integrity and the difference between ego-driven integrity and authentic self-driven integrity. And then we came through, you know, how do we start being having integrity from the other side. In other words, being honest about who we really are and what we're really doing so that we can click up. Because until we can click in to like what we are, our active self, what we're doing and what we say we're going to do,
Mhm.
we just don't have we, like, we can't move.
Right.
And then I got to the point of thinking, okay, I've just been focused on the disciplinarian part of that rather than harnessing the power of discipline to support artistic expression and the kindness. So a parent is both kind and instills discipline in their child.
And and behind that is that natural impulse to share. And when we can again follow the thread through our own history and through these experiences where we got stuck and that continue to now replay themselves inside of us, then what we can get back to is that seed of authenticity, which, if we look at your example of sharing, then being sent to your room to fix it, the
Mhm.
impulse was just to share it, that it was good enough in the moment as it was, and how now to value that. You found a way to do that with improv. Now it's letting yourself do that to say, this is the book today. And you know, in 5 years, I may do a second edition that has some changes.
Yeah, or for me, saying the book is not complete and in integrity by itself because the book is an exploration, and therefore you need to have this other thing, which is the living, changeable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, I just realized page 45 has this thing. No, I discovered something new.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to have that, it needs to be alive and has a changeability. So it's just that the book is missing
Yeah.
the living part of itself.
Well, anytime something comes into a form, it takes on a composition, whether it's a book or it's a piece of music or this rocking chair I'm sitting in, it gets fixed in one form, and then all other possibilities are excluded for that form. But just because I have this rocking chair and that's the sitting is in one way, I have other chairs in my office too that are very different. I have a nice, beautiful, relaxed back recliner. You know, I have a little settee. So form doesn't have to be exclusive of other form. And that's part of what stops us sometimes. So for instance, yes, your book or a piece of music or, a dress you make or whatever. There's that form, but that doesn't stop it. There is a reality of living on the physical plane. If I'm going to put ideas on paper and share them with the world, then I'm going to have to be able to say, this is the form it's taking at this time. And I realize, and I want you, my reader, to realize that this is not the absolute truth. It's the truth of my understanding in this moment in time. And I hope it will prompt you to find your own, and that you'll grow the material forward, and I'll continue to grow it forward, and it'll grow us forward. So I think there is also this recognition that form does limit things. And that's both.
I'm just so, from a composition, from an improv standpoint, I think of form as an internal flexible structure that supports infinite possible external forms. So I think I need to think about that, because I know our time is up and you have to go, but and I do too. But I need to think about that, because I'm so enamored of this idea of the structures that support creativity, and I'm so scared of those that stop. That stop. But you're right. I mean, you can't share it. You can't share a meal if you don't finish making it. You can't.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I'm going to think about that. Okay. So, all right. It takes us back again to vulnerability, but now I can look at it through integrity.
Yes.
That how, and getting and make how to tell the truth of where I actually am to myself and who I actually am to myself.
Yes, and that's the most important integrity any of us can have, is really being honest about how we operate internally. What really are the processes, because only when we can see them with equanimity and compassion can something begin to shift.
Right. And that's being in integrity, meaning not as a value judgment, but just you're lined up. You're lined up, and you're not having to hold it into place, but it is in alignment, and now it can move. Well, Kathleen, thank you once again for this wonderful conversation. And I just love that, we can come up with a subject and then just explore it.
Yes.
I really love that.
Yeah, I do too.
Thank you. I will go check to see if anybody's written anything on Facebook, and I will end this. And I'm just going to end the recording, but I'll keep on. And thank you, and I'll see you after the new year.
Okay, terrific. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.